Hello, practical law students. Now, this is our final lesson for the week. We're going to start looking at crimes against property. In the previous two lessons, we talked about crimes against the person, and we dealt with things like homicide, suicide, kidnapping, assault, battery, and rape. As we move in, and of course, there are crimes against the person because people are involved. There are also some serious crimes against things, and those are considered crimes against property. So, over the next couple of lessons, what we're going to be looking at is things like when property is destroyed, such as arson and vandalism, or when property is taken against the will of the owner, like larceny. We're going to mention cyber crimes against people like cyber stalking and against property like identity theft, but because we're using computers to do that, that kind of falls under the crimes against property. In recent years, the number of traditional property crimes has fallen due to better crime prevention behaviors like security lighting, home and automobile alarm systems, steering wheel locks, greater attention to locking doors and windows, and a tendency to carry less cash. Okay, so we have seen a number of traditional property crimes fall in past years due to better crime prevention behaviors. Now, as with the first two lessons this week, as we move through these, please be sure you were taking notes on what we talk about. There, I will warn you ahead of time. There's just a lot of definitions in these lessons with crimes against property. Okay, so just be prepared to write some definitions down. All right, so let's get started here. Our first crime is arson. Okay, arson is the willful and malicious burning of a person's property. It is a crime to burn any building or structure, even if the person who burns the structure owns it. Okay, so a lot of times you will see people burning down property that they own in hopes of collecting insurance money. Not only are they going to be found guilty of arson, but they're also probably going to be found guilty of fraud as well. So anytime you willfully or maliciously burn property, that is arson. Burning property with intent to defraud an insurance company is usually a separate crime, regardless of type or ownership. We talked about that. It is also considered a form of racial violence, okay, because oftentimes the property that is being burned, part of the reason the property is being burned, and this is tied to groups like the KKK, is because they are doing it because the person that owns the property fits a certain racial profile. So it is considered a form of racial violence. Church Arson Prevention Act of 1996 helps oversee the investigation and prosecution of arson at places of worship across the United States, and there's an increase in penalties for those crimes. That's one of those tie-ins with racial violence. Oftentimes, churches were targeted because they catered to certain congregations, and the idea is we want to have a little bit tougher way to prosecute people that do that. So we've got the Church Arson Prevention Act of 1996. Now, if in the process of burning the structure, okay, somebody dies, all right, then we move back and we talk about crimes against the person, all right, and we're going to deal with felony murder probably, okay, because the arson is the malicious act, and you were acting in a way that disregards human life, okay. So not only could you face a charge of arson for burning a building down, but if somebody dies in the process, you could face a felony murder charge as well. Now, our next example of crimes against property is vandalism. Vandalism is considered malicious mischief. It is the willful destruction or damage to the property of another. It produces millions of dollars of damage each year. Examples include like breaking windows, ripping down fences, writing graffiti, breaking off hoard ornaments, etc., etc. The extent of damage determines if it is a felony or misdemeanor. Okay, so if it's above a certain dollar amount, it will be considered felony vandalism. If it is below, it is considered a misdemeanor. Okay, it's misdemeanor vandalism. But it is the willful destruction or damage to the property of another. That's what vandalism is. Our third example, larceny. Larceny is the unlawful taking and carrying away of the property of another person against his or her will with the intent to permanently deprive the owner of it. So if you damage the property, it's vandalism. If you take the property away with the intent of keeping it, that's larceny. Larceny is keeping lost property when a reasonable method exists to find the owner. That's another form of larceny as well. Okay, not only do you take the property, but if you find property and you keep it, you are also guilty of larceny, especially if there are ways to try to locate the actual owner and you don't do that. All right, so if you keep stolen property or you keep lost property without finding the owner, you're going to be guilty of larceny. That includes keeping property delivered to you by mistake. Grand larceny, you often hear the term grand larceny. Grand larceny is theft of anything above a certain value, like often it's $100 or more. That's a felony. Petty larceny is theft of anything of lesser value, usually less than $100. It's misdemeanor. Okay, so we talked about with vandalism, there's a dollar amount involved. With larceny, there's a dollar amount involved. If it's over 100, it's grand larceny. It's a felony. If it's under 100, it's petty larceny, and it's a misdemeanor. Now, under this umbrella of larceny comes two important terms. One is shoplifting. Shoplifting is taking items from a store without paying for them or intending to pay for them. And then concealment, which is attempted shoplifting. Okay, these are both forms of larceny. Now, it is difficult to make the distinction, so I'll try to use general terms here. If you take something from the store and you make it out of the store, that's shoplifting. If you take something and you're headed toward the exit and you get stopped, that's concealment. Okay? In both cases, it's larceny because you're trying to deprive the owner of the property, namely the store owner, of their property. So it's going to be considered larceny. If you make it out, it's shoplifting. If you don't, it's concealment. Larceny is a problem. Shoplifting and concealment is a problem because they cost billions of dollars each year. And it is passed on to us as the consumers in the form of higher prices. Okay? Because if people see their stuff getting stolen all the time or taken all the time, one of the ways to recoup losses is to raise prices up. Okay, so larceny is a very, very serious problem. Vandalism is a very, very serious problem because of the amount of money that is lost every year with both of these. Speaking of money, that's going to lead us to our next crimes against property, which is embezzlement. Embezzlement is the unlawful taking of property by someone to whom it is entrusted. Okay. Example, a bank teller who takes money from the cash drawer. Several years ago, Bernie Madoff, okay, and Enron was the company. Bernie Madoff was given money to invest for other people. Instead of investing it, he kept it for himself. That is embezzlement. Okay, you take property that is entrusted to you. It was entrusted to you for some other purpose, but you keep it for yourself. Okay, same deal with the bank teller who takes money from customers and are supposed to put it in the bank drawer, and the bank drawer goes in the vault. If the teller keeps the money for themselves, that is embezzlement. Some states have merged the crimes of embezzlement, larceny, and obtaining property by false pretenses, okay, which is the intentional misstatement of fact, into a statutory crime of theft. Okay, so sometimes we combine all three of those: embezzlement, larceny, and obtaining property by false pretenses, and it becomes statutory theft. Okay, but anytime you take property entrusted to you for another purpose, that is embezzlement. Robbery. Now, we mentioned robbery briefly with crimes against the person because larceny and embezzlement is the unlawful taking and carrying away of property when you take that property off of someone That's robbery, okay? The unlawful taking of property from a person's immediate possession by force or intimidation, that is robbery. Robbery straddles the two categories of crimes against the person and crimes against property, okay? Because you're taking property, but you're taking it off the person. So it is a crime against a person and a crime against property. This involves theft of property and actual or potential physical harm to the victim. The difference between larceny and robbery is the use of force, okay, and the fact that you are taking something off the person's immediate possession, okay. It's almost always a felony, but many states impose stricter penalties for armed robbery. So if you have a gun or other weapon when you force the person to give them the property, that could lead to a more serious charge. Okay, so the unlawful taking of property from a person's immediate possession by force or intimidation is robbery. Extortion. Extortion is known as blackmail. It is the use of threats to obtain the property of another. It covers threats to do future physical harm, destroy property, injure someone's character or reputation. So if you are forcing somebody to give you property, all right, and the threat is, if you don't, I will destroy your reputation using letters or newspaper articles or something like that. Even if you haven't gotten to that point yet, if you are caught by authorities, you are still going to be charged with extortion, okay? Because it's the use of threats to obtain the property of another, all right? Blackmail. Burglary. Burglary is breaking and entering a dwelling of another person during the night with intent to commit a felony therein. That is the original definition. Okay? Today, it is the unauthorized entry into any structure with the intent to commit a crime, regardless of the time of day. All right? So at one point in time, it used to be at night, but now, anytime you enter into a structure with the intent to commit a crime, that is burglary. Again, it's different from robbery, okay? Robbery is when you take something off of the person. When you break into the person's structure or their home, then it becomes burglary, okay? Now, if you take property off of them in the act of breaking into their home, that's going to be robbery, okay? It gets kind of confusing, and there's very intricate lines and definitions that we have to follow. So I'm trying not to get too confusing with you guys, but I'm also trying to explain the differences and the nuances in the terminology, because we talk about that. It's important to have the right definitions and be as accurate as possible when it comes time to charge people with these crimes, okay? There are stiffer penalties for burglaries committed at night. Burglaries in inhabited dwellings, and burglaries committed with weapons. Okay, so any unauthorized entry into a structure with intent to commit a crime is a burglary. Realize that you could face more serious charges if that structure is inhabited, if it is at night, and if you have a weapon to commit the crime. Then the last thing I want to talk about today is real quick. And again, I told you, be careful. There's just a lot of definitions that we got to go through. So it looks like we're moving through these pretty quickly. The last thing I want to talk about is forgery. Okay. Forgery is a crime in which a person falsely makes or alters a writing or document with intent to defraud. It is signing someone else's name. Okay. Forgery could also be something simple like changing or erasing part of a previously signed document, okay, like a contract. All right, if one person goes back with the contract and erases part of it, that's forgery, okay, because you are trying to defraud somebody. Under forgery is the idea of uttering, okay, sorry about that. Uttering is offering someone a document as genuine, although it is known to be fake. Okay, so like if you have like autographs, okay, if you offer to sell somebody an autograph of a sports personality or entertainment personality or something like that, and you claim it is real and you know that it is fake, that's uttering that is a form of forgery. Okay, it's the intent to defraud a person by falsely making or altering the writing of a document. Now, like I said, it looks like we've gone through a lot. We still got some more crimes against property to talk about. We're going to talk about receiving stolen property, unauthorized use of vehicles. We're going to talk about cybercrime and things like that. But we got some general definitions down of different types of crimes against the property. Now we're going to look at how these crimes are actually carried out in the next lesson coming up next week.